Okay, we continue with the second part of the video. The first part was an hour long, so I decided to make a second part to it, ending the book of Judges, comparing Judges with, which is the seventh book, with Deuteronomy 7. And the things are often repetitive. You'll see the same words appearing in the same thematic links occurring in almost every chapter of Judges. And I believe I believe I put together a few pages by simply showing uh, like a summary of where do those themes appear instead of going one by one. Okay, so let's continue. And I think you've seen this in the previous page. Uh, I'm gonna go on to the next page. This is simply to show that uh, the name Gideon, for example, is related to Geda, which means to cut down, and cut down is mentioned in Deuteronomy. And uh, Joash or Yoash means God will send a fire, or God is a fire. God is a consuming fire, and fire is mentioned in Deuteronomy 7. And besides that, that's it. Okay. So both Deuteronomy 7 and the seventh book, Judges 8, has destroy, break down, beat down in common. Destroying their altar is what's mentioned there. Whereas in Judges 8, it was Gideon avenging his own people because they didn't give him bread while they were faint, while they were hungry, and as a result, he said that if we come back with the kings captured, if we come back with the kings captured, then I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna break down this tower. So that's what he says in verse 9. And he spake also unto men of Penuel, saying, When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. And in verse 17, he actually came back with the um, with the kings captured, and he beat down the tower of Penuel and slew the men of the city. And actually, to add to that, maybe uh, the name of the city was Penuel. There was Penuel and there was Sukkoth. And Sukkoth means booths, and the Feast of Tabernacles is related to Sukkoth. That's what it's called in Hebrew, and that probably refers to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And he's not gonna come in. Of course, he's gonna have mercy to those who look for mercy, but obviously people are gonna fight him. The people are gonna resist them, and he's gonna break down their towers. Okay, going on to Deuteronomy 7:16 and Judges 8, and the cycle. Gideon once again falls in the cycle of sin. Um And let me read Deuteronomy 7 verse 16. And thou shalt consume all the people which the Lord thy God shall deliver thee. Thine eyes shall have no pity upon them, neither shalt thou serve their gods, for that will be a snare unto thee. And Judges 8 verse 27, it says, and Gideon made an ephod thereof, and put it in his city, even in Ophrah, and all Israel went thither a whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. This makes me wonder, because when Abiathar fled from Saul, the priest Abiathar, and he joined David, he took an ephod with him. And I'm not really sure. I need to really look into that, why at one point it helped David, and at another point Gideon made an ephod and it became a snare. It makes me wonder. Uh, so there's a lot to study in the Word of God. I do wonder, for example, um, how do the temple, the pillars, the menorah, the building of the menorah in Exodus 28, 29, 30, and so on, how do they relate to the rest of the scriptures in a numerical sense? How does the scriptures reveal that we hadn't known anything, or it was a mystery concerning the temple, the menorah, the shewbread, and Ark of the Covenant, and so on? I'm pretty sure that this Biblewheel pattern, the numerical patterns, are gonna reveal some things. And at this point, I'm comparing two texts at a time, but I plan on bringing 3 or more texts to show you how they're all related to each other within a pattern, within a numerical pattern. So once again, we look at Deuteronomy 7 and the 7th book, Judges 9, and once again it reminds us, it repeats the theme: deliver, give into their hands. So when you look at in verse 24, Deuteronomy 7 verse 24, and he shall deliver their kings into thine hand, and thou shalt destroy their name from under heaven, and there shall no man be able to stand before thee until thou have destroyed them. And when you look at Judges 9, it says Abimelech. Abimelech means my father is king, and Abimelech was the son of the concubine of Gideon, nicknamed Jerubbaal. And when Gideon himself denied, I'm not going to be your king. But Abimelech, the name Abimelech means my father is king. It's strange. I don't know why it mentioned that, but it does relate to Deuteronomy 7:24, because at the end of the story, Abimelech died. Abimelech died by the hand of a woman, actually, who threw a millstone. He was right under it, and he died. Well, let's read Judges 9:4. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, wherein Abimelech hired vain and light persons which followed them. Three score and ten is referring to 70 pieces of silver, and the number of sons that Gideon had were 70. And I believe it was these sons that actually gave 70 pieces of silver. And Baal Berith, I wonder though, is that was that considered to be a bank in their times? Uh, Maybe more than a bank, because they were also going in and drinking wine, and that's how it became a stumbling block to them. Where one of the captains, I guess, the he made fun of Abimelech, and he said, I can do a better job than him." And there was a spy that told what he said, and eventually there was a war between them. And let me read you Judges 9:29. "And would to God this people were under my hand, then would I remove Abimelech." And he said to Abimelech, "Increase thine army and come out." This was the guy who was making fun of him. And the next theme is it's not a new thing. Great, increase, multiply, many grasshoppers. Um, at this point, he the same person, was it Gaul or I forget the name of the person, but once again he said, "Increase thine army and come out." And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him, and many were overthrown and wounded, even unto the entering of the gate. And that's the end of this page. So once again, we find the theme of serving other gods and the anger of the Lord being kindled, and this is found in Judges 9 as well. And in Judges 9:27 it says, "And they went out into the fields and gathered their vineyards and trode the grapes and made merry, and went into the house of their God and did eat and drink and cursed Abimelech." Uh, verse 28, "And Gaal the son of Ebed said, Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is not he the son of Jerubbaal, and Zebul his officer served the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem? For why should we serve him?" It seems like whatever custom Hamor, the father of Shechem, in Genesis 34, 34 had, 34 or 35, and they probably continued their traditions, and because they had the temple of Baal Berith over there. In any case, verse 30, "When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled." And verse 38, "Then said Zebul unto him, Where is now thy mouth wherein thou hast said, Who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Is not this the people that thou hast despised? Go out, I pray thee, and fight with them." Sorry. So, in other words, God split up the country, or split up their region, and they he split up the region. He set up one against another, and they on both sides they were arrogant. One wants to rule, the other one questions the authority, and that's not what God wanted. But when they proceeded and made themselves a king, and then they decided to rebel against him, God is at the end saying that He rewarded them to their own heads. He rewarded the evil that they did to their own heads. Once again, when we go on to the next chapter, Judges 10, it mentions judge again, and this time it was. Let me read it to you. And after Abimelech, there arose to defend Israel Tola the son of Puah, the son of Dodo, men of Issachar, and he dwelt in Shamir in Mount Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years, and died and was buried in Shamir. And after him arose Jair a Gileadite, and judged Israel 22 years. And then at the end of, well, not at the end, but in the 10th chapter of Judges, once again, there's the theme of serving other gods, and the Lord being, the anger of the Lord being kindled against you. And let me read this to you. Judges 10 verses 6. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and served Baalim and Ashtaroth, and the gods of Syria, and the gods of Zidon, and the gods of Moab, and the gods of the children of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines, and forsook the Lord, and served not him. Notice that at this point, the initial seven nations are not mentioned. The initial seven nations are not mentioned, and in the book of Judges, the only nation that had a conflict among those seven nations was the Canaanites. I'm not sure if the Canaanites is referring to an overall term, or was it one group of people among the seven? But in this case, you'll notice there are other nations that rose up after that. There's Syria, there's Zidon, there's Moab, and the children of Ammon and the Philistines. And these nations played a crucial role. They're at the borders of Israel, and they were the ones that put Israel to the test. And it says, as they took their gods and worshipped them, and forsook the Lord, and served not him. And verse 7, it says, the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines, and into the hands of the children of Ammon. And verse 10, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, saying, we have sinned against thee, both because we have forsaken our God, and also served Baalim. Verse 13, it is God responding. He says, yet ye have forsaken me, and served other gods, wherefore I will deliver you no more. At some point, perhaps a dispensation, at some point God says, okay, I'm not going to do it anymore, because you continually sinning, you're continually going against me, you're continually provoking me to jealousy and anger. And At that point, in verse 16, for example, it says, "And they put away the strange gods from among them and served the Lord, and his soul was grieved to the misery for the misery of Israel." In other words, the people of Israel did something that showed that they repented. They put away the strange gods from among them. And this resembles 1 Samuel 7. Once again, they had a conflict with the Philistines, and they put away their strange gods. And that's the end of this page. All right. Once again, there's the theme of the Canaanites and subduing the enemy is what comes in is mentioned. This is Judges 11, and like I mentioned before, Canaan and subdue are related to each other. The only difference is the noon at the end is missing, and the marks. So this is Jephthah's time, and at the end it says, "And he smote them from Aroer even till thou come to Minnith, even 20 cities, and unto the plain of the vineyards with a very great slaughter. Thus the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel." Once again, deliver and give into their hands is mentioned in Judges 11, and this goes back to the beginning. And it says in verse 9, it says, "And Jephthah said unto the elders of Gilead, If ye bring me home again to fight against the children of Ammon, and the Lord deliver them before me, shall I be your head?" And verse 21, "And the Lord God of Israel delivered Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they smote them, and Israel possessed all the land of the Amorites, the inhabitants of that country." And now in this case, which reminds me, the Ammonites, the children of Ammon, uh, in particular, their king was arguing with Jephthah, and Jephthah was quite a verbal person. He was a talkative person, so he would argue with him before fighting against him. And Jephthah, who was a son of a harlot, and rejected by his own family, his own half brothers, I guess, um knew his history. He knew his history, and when the king of the Ammonites were was arguing with him that this land of Gilead would belong to us, and you took it away from us. And Jephthah, at this point in the book of Numbers, is referring from the book of Numbers. I mean, the wars in the wilderness. Probably even before, probably even from Joshua, because where exactly did they fight the Amorites? I think it was Numbers. Sihon was mentioned in Numbers, but he did use the scriptures as a source to empower him. He was saying that he was on the right side. He he wasn't. The land didn't belong to the Ammonites. That's what he's trying to say. It belonged to the Amorites, and Israel possessed the land. God gave them to the Amorites. So we'll continue. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord and said, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands. And at that point, I cut off the sentence, but he vowed that whatever comes out of his house, the first thing that comes out of his house, he's going to offer it to the Lord. And it turned out that his only daughter, like his only child that he had, and he had to offer her to the Lord. And should we think that he did a mistake by vowing a vow? Or could it be that that was an act of God, that he allowed that? On the one hand, God says he doesn't want he doesn't want to take he doesn't accept a man's sacrifice because we are not pure, we are not acceptable. The only way we become pure is by his son's sacrifice, Jesus Christ, because he himself was pure. He himself was not man. He was a man. He was God who took the form of a man, and he was fit to be sacrificed. So, should we say that he shouldn't have vowed the vow, or should we say that God used that vow to let his name be glorified somehow? Because both Jephthah and his daughter were believers. Even though he was the son of a harlot and his daughter was his offspring. Could it be that God didn't allow the sons of harlots to live? And we see, for example, in Solomon's time, there were two harlots and that had children, and one of them died, and the other one had one. So the mother of the one that died stole the other one's child, and Solomon's judgment was to take a sword and to split the child in two. In other words, to kill the child. But because the mother showed mercy and she said, "Let the other one have. It's okay as long as as long as he's gonna grow and as long as he's gonna live." And at that point, Solomon says, "Now I know who the real mother is." So it's a dilemma at this point. I can't tell. Did Jephthah do the right thing? But in verse 32, so Jephthah passed over unto the children of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. So that's the end of this page. So looking at Judges 11, once again, judgments are mentioned in Deuteronomy 7, in those two verses, 11 and 12. And Judges, obviously, as the book of the Judges, and almost every chapter, there's a mentioning of judging, judgment, but at this point, Jephthah actually seemed to be quite historian. He seemed to be quite a knowledgeable person, whereas others haven't done that. Look, because in verse 27 it says, "Wherefore I have not sinned against thee, but thou doest wrong to war against me." And then it says, "The Lord, the judge, be judge." And that reminds me of the second, no, sorry, um, Joel, the 29th book, or the seventh book of the second cycle, where it mentions that he will come to judge the nations, and he's going to come in the God is going to come in the valley of Jehoshaphat to judge the nations, and the name Jehoshaphat means God will judge. And at that point it says God will judge his people. And when you look at this, the Lord is Jehovah, Jeho, and judge Shaphat. And then the meaning of the name Ammon is people. So God will judge his people. Once again, this time in Judges 12, deliver, give into their hands is mentioned. Uh, in Judges 12, verse 3, "And when I saw that you delivered me not, I put my life in my hands, and passed over against the children of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Wherefore then are you come up unto me this day to fight against me?" And these were the Israelites that I think the Ephraimites, I believe it was the Ephraimites, that argued with Jephthah. They chided with him, and I believe that there was a civil war or something at that point. But moving on to chapter 12 again. Once again, judging is mentioned. Um, Let me read this to you. And verse 7, "And Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then died Jephthah the Gileadite, and was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. And after Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. And he had 30 sons and 30 daughters, whom he sent abroad, and took in 30 daughters from abroad for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years." And verse 11, "And after him Elon, a Zebulonite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. And after him Abdon, the son of Hillel, a Pirathonite, judged Israel." And verse 14, "And he had 40 sons and 30 nephews that rode on 70 ass colts. And he judged Israel 8 years." Okay. Now we come to the last judge in the book of Judges. Uh, that was Samson. And Samson, even his birth was predicted by the angel that appeared to his father, or actually the wife of his mother, that is Manoah's wife. But I did an error by putting Judges 6. It's supposed to be Judges 13. There's not much on this page. There's only the mentioning of altars, and in Deuteronomy 7, it's talking about the pagan altars, the altars of the nations that don't serve God, that serve gods but not God. Whereas in Judges 13, I'm gonna read it to you. But before reading, here it is. The Hebrew word for altar is mizbeach, and is related to sacrifice, zabach, as well as a Zayin word. The Zayin word, Zayin is the seventh letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And verse Judges 13, verse 20. For it came to pass when the flame went up toward heaven from off the altar, that the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar, and Manoah and his wife looked on it and fell on their faces to the ground. Once again, uh, both Deuteronomy and the seventh book Judges 13 mention give into their hands. And in Judges 13 it says, verse 1, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. So we go on to chapter 14, and once again, deliver and give is mentioned, but not into their hands. Let me read Judges 14, verse 9. And he took thereof in his hands, and went on eating, and came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and they did eat. This was referring to the honey that Samson got from the carcass of the lion that he slew a day before, I believe. And they did eat, but he told not them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. And Samson, verse 12, and Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you, if you can certainly declare it me within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. But if you cannot declare it me, then shall ye give me 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. And they said unto him, Put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. And the spirit, see, at this point, the lords of the Philistines, they asked a riddle, but then his wife to be urged them to tell her the riddle, and she has a big mouth. She was actually offered money in return, and she asked them the riddle. She told them the riddle, and okay. So continuing with Judges 14, there's another theme that comes up that is a common thing between Deuteronomy 7 and the seventh book Judges, and it's once again giving or taking daughters to marriage, sons or daughters to marriage. So in Deuteronomy 7 verse 3, neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. However, Samson desired a daughter from the Philistines, which is not his people. The Philistines, they worship Dagon, the fish god. They didn't worship the Lord God, Jehovah. And Judges 14, verse 1, and Samson went down to Timnath, and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother, and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Verse 3, then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines. And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. And it is strange because in Deuteronomy 7, God actually forbid taking daughters from strangers who don't serve the Lord God, who don't serve Him. And but at this point, in within the text, it's not mentioned here, but he did say that God was looking for an opportunity to avenge the Philistines. Um, and so we looked at different groups of enemies, different groups of people. For example, well, the first enemy was Kushan Rishataim. I believe that's how it's called. But um, I looked at the meaning of the Hebrew word. It was double the blackness or something. Um, and the line Othniel means the line of God who overcame that. I don't know if there's any more significance to that, but the second enemy was Moab, and the Moabites were uh, the king of the Moabites was Eglon, and I looked at the meaning of the name Eglon, and it meant a fattened calf. And Eglon, the king of the Moabites, was overweight. He loved to eat, and he loved parties or eating, drinking, and for that reason, Ehud gave him a meat offering, and he tricked him pretty much. He tricked him because he had hidden a dagger on the right side, and as he was going in, the guardsmen they looked on his left side, thinking he was a right-handed man, but he was a Benjamite and he was a left-handed man, and he that's how they overcame the king of the Moabites in general. And at that point in Judges 3, it mentioned that they didn't know to make weapons, to make swords, and Ehud was pretty much the first one in a long time to make a sword and do something like that. And I guess at that point they've pretty much beaten their swords into plowshares, and they didn't know how to fight, and they compromised with the Gentiles, with the unbelievers. And then the next thing was the Canaanites, where they had the chariots of iron, King Jabin of the Canaanites and his captain Sisera. And at the end of the story, Captain Sisera was fleeing on his feet. He left the chariots of iron and he was fleeing on his feet. And he was defeated by a woman eventually. And he was actually put to sleep by the woman giving him buttermilk, and that's how she killed him, with a tent peg. And the next group of people were the Midianites, and they were known to be numerous, and they impoverished Israel by trampling on their crops, and that's why Gideon was hurrying up to thresh the crops and to hide it in a cave or something. But the way that they defeated the Midianites was by God sending an army of 300 men uh, versus a numerous a group of numerous people, and they overcame. God showed His glory by 300 men, and not only 300, but they were hungry as well. That nobody gave them food, and they chased down. They caught the kings, the last two kings of Midian. Uh, so as you see, there are certain things. I think Judges in general show the things of this life, the things we consider as strength, they become our weaknesses. For example, the king of Eglon loved to eat. Some people want to eat thinking they're gonna be strong, they're gonna grow strong, but they go fat. They grow fat. And some people love uh, how do you say? Some people love to be armed, to be strong in uh, by technology and everything. Uh, when I think about chariots of iron, I think of the modern tanks. I guess you can put the cars. I guess you can use the cars as an example as well, but the tanks are more with the intention of a military power. And at that point, they overcame the military power. Um, the Midianites were known for their numbers, and by the least amount of soldiers, 300 soldiers, they overcame the numerous army. Uh, After that, there was Abimelech story. In chapter 10, there were various judges. Um, Chapter 11 was the story of Jephthah. Jephthah loved to argue, and not just argue, but to prove his points. As he proved this point in towards the king of the Ammonites, and he proved it well. He had the right to prove, and the king of the Ammonites was misinformed, and he was insisting on his views, but Jephthah proved them well before fighting. That is, and so I also see that I would say perhaps the beast of Revelation or the last world empire's might is all these things combined, and all the things of these enemy nations combined, and maybe that's where God will strengthen us to overcome these the New World Order and so on, the last world empire. And well, in this case, in the case of the Philistines, it was strictly the worship of Dagon. Okay, so when Samson was stripped of his glory, when Samson's hair was shaved, they brought him to the temple of Dagon, and by that time his hair grew up and began to grow, and as he prayed, God gave him the strength, the miraculous strength again, and he brought brought the temple down by the pillars, and all the men with it, and the same thing happens in almost a similar thing happens in the story of in First Samuel, when in First Samuel 5 they attacked. Sorry, the First Samuel 4, when they attacked Israel and they took the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant was placed in front of Dagon, and Dagon the next day was on his face, and they put him up again. The second time, his head was cut off, his body was cut off, his arms were cut off. That is, and his trunk was left. And at the same time, God was plaguing Himself. Even though Israel couldn't do a thing, they lost the word. They weren't part of. They weren't being used as an instrument of God, but God was plaguing the Philistines Himself, to the point that the Philistines decided to send back the Ark of the Covenant. Imagine that. And another challenge was, as the Philistines brought up the giant, and David slew the giant, the Israelites took I believe his head as well, but his shield, I mean, the sword of the sword of Goliath was kept in the city of Nob, where David, as he was fleeing from Saul, asked the Ahimelech concerning the shield, and I mean the sword, and Ahimelech gave it to him. And by the way, the city of Nob was a priestly city, or Levitical city near Jerusalem, apparently. And but they kept the sword of the Goliath among the priests. I'm not sure if the tabernacle was there at the time, but it was mentioned. The tabernacle was mentioned, I believe, in there were a few locations in any case. But the Ark of the Covenant was kept in, as you find it in 1 Samuel 6 at the time. Okay, and but at the end of the book of 1 Samuel, when there was a war between the Philistines and the Israelites, when the Philistines saw that Saul had committed suicide, they cut his head off, and they kept his head again among themselves. I think it was in their temple as well. So the Philistines were known to giving their god the glory, which was a false god. And that was, and in all the cases, the Israelites weren't able to overcome, but it was the supernatural force of God that overcame them. And that's gonna be the end of this page. Alright, so comparing Deuteronomy 7 with the 7th book, Judges 14, once again, there's a theme of the anger of the Lord being kindled, and at this time, it was Samson's anger that was being kindled. And it says, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave their change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. Imagine his fiancée told everything about, told the secret, expounded the riddle to them, and because of that his anger was kindled. So this time we're looking at Judges 15, comparing with Deuteronomy 7, and once again the deliver give into their hands is mentioned. And Judges 15 verse 1. But it came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid, and he said, I will go in to my wife into the chamber, but her father would not suffer him to go in. And number 2, and her father said, I verily thought that you had utterly hated her, therefore I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. Then the Philistines said, that's in verse 6, who had done this? Samson had set a field on fire. And then the Philistines said, who had done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. Verse 12 and 13. And they said unto him, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that you will not fall upon me yourselves. This is referring to the Judah. And they spake unto him, saying, no, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hand. But surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. In verse 18 it says, and he was sore athirst, and called on the Lord, and said, thou hast given me this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die for for thirst, and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised. One thing though, but when the Judeans or the Jews bound Samson, it reminds me of Jesus being bound in Jerusalem. I mean, the Jews bound him; they delivered him to the Gentiles. But at the end, when he was on the cross, he said, "I thirst," and Samson was thirsty at that point as well. So there's a summary in Judges 15, and he, referring to Samson, judged in Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Once again, it mentions the altar, but in Judges 16, 13, 23, it's referring to sacrifice and offer a sacrifice. As you see, the Hebrew word for altar is mizbeach, and is related to sacrifice, zabach, as well as offer, zebach, a Zayin word. Zayin is the 7th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So, in verse 23, it says, then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And notice that the way they got Samson into their hand was through deceit and spying. Once again, it does mention delivering into our hand. Judges 16 verse 5, it says, "And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her," referring to Delilah, "and said unto her, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver." Verse 23 and 24, "Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, Our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand." Verse 24, "And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us." And it's interesting that even though Samson was bound, his hair was growing, they're saying these things, that he was handed over, the enemy was handed over, but uh, in reality, it wasn't Samson that got the last laugh. It was God that got the last laugh, because eventually Samson died as well. And the other thing is, once again, great increase, multiply, many grasshoppers are are mentioned, or there's something in common between Deuteronomy 7 and Judges 16, because it says that the Philistines are saying, "Which slew many of us," and at the end, "So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life," referring to Samson's life. And once again, judging is mentioned, referring to Samson. He judged Israel 20 years.